Welcome everyone to the AA group. If you're new to Agnostic Agile, Agnostic Agile was founded in 2017. Melanie is actually a co-founder, which is great. So it's always lovely to have Melanie back. And it was created initially to balance the trends that we've seen in the Agile industry, where people are peddling expensive frameworks, certification, or pushing a one-size-fits-all approach. And we believe this goes against the original spirit of the Agile Manifesto. So our 13 principles serve as a reminder of what it means to be in service to agility and to put our clients' best interests and contexts ahead of our personal preferences. We often come together as a group to learn, share, and grow, and we hope to accomplish all three tonight. So that's a bit about AA if you're new. And with that, Melanie, please teach us about neuroscience.
Yeah, well, 2017. I remember you, me, your brother Sam, all talking about the fact that we needed to put something out there, which was Agile is a way of thinking, not just, certifications and methodologies. And that's what it was all about, because we had people saying that they had Agile certifications, but their thinking, their mindset was in no way Agile. Tonight, what I want to do is I want to talk about how our brains work and thinking about how we can practically use neuroscience to get started. So I want to demonstrate how, what really excites me is that in my learning of neuroscience over the last 10 years, I think what it really does hit home is exactly how the Agile techniques that we use day in, day out, when you look behind the scenes using Agile neuroscience, you can sort of think, actually, these Agile techniques are really brain smart. They're really clever. So that's what I want to do. If you understand how the brain works, have a think about the Agile techniques, bring them together. It's very much around being brain smart. So that's my plan. Put anything you like in the chat. If Nabil sees a really good question, he knows me well enough to just dive in and interrupt me, to be honest. What I want to talk about, first of all, is I want to talk about how we're basically here to minimize threats, decrease negative brain chemistry, and create rewards, increase positive brain chemistry. That is what we're trying to achieve. Because if as a human being we feel threatened, we become anxious, a lot of negative brain chemistry. That anxiety does not help us get anything done. When we are feeling relaxed, I'm anxious about speaking to all of you guys. I'm anxious to work out if I can hit the timings. I'm anxious to make sure I make sense. I can answer your questions. So I have a certain anxiety, but I'm trying to get myself into but it's a fun evening with friends kind of mindset, because I know what that will do to my brain. It opens up my possibilities. It makes me more creative. When I'm less stressed, I am less defensive. I'm more open to new ideas. So there's something here about the understanding of the brain that pushes us towards where do we want to be. And I'm going to look at a few things, some of the things around how we plan, prioritization, team working, psychological safety, and celebrations. And I'm going to try and explain them all in relation to the brain. So my starting point is this. There is a sweet spot between threat and reward. As I've just said, that the issue around on the left-hand side being more threatened is there is a negative brain chemistry. When you get into neuroscience, it becomes really interesting. It's like making cocktails, because you start to realize about certain chemicals within the brain, and the way in which you have more of those makes you feel a certain way, and more of those makes you feel a certain way. So it's always really interesting. But the thing about when I'm feeling threatened, maybe my status is being threatened by something you're asking me to do, because I don't know this new thing that you're asking me to do. Like, suddenly I've got to do a product backlog. What's that? And therefore I'm going to feel anxious about it. And that anxiety and that stress, it reduces my energy to learn this new thing and to work in this new way. What's actually happening is that there's adrenaline pumping through me, but also, when we get anxious, we get this thing called noradrenaline, epinephrine if you're in the US. It's about being hypervigilant. And what happens? We care about this wildly, because what happens when we're anxious is actually people's frame of reference shrinks. Hypervigilance means that we start to really focus in on the thing. And of course, when we're less stressed, we start to put whatever the thing is into a wider context. And we're able to ask ourselves questions like, it's not affecting every part of my job, or will this matter this time next week, next month? But those kind of reassuring, putting it into a wider context kind of things we cannot do when we're stressed. We start to focus in on the thing becomes the only thing we can think about. We start to get more anxious. It becomes a vicious circle. So understanding that those chemicals are sort of building up. And in fact, cortisol, think of cortisol as a tap. And what happens is, the tap turns on full with the negative chemicals when we're in a threat state. So whatever I want to put across to people, when I'm explaining my agile roadmap, for example, what I want to think much more about well-being, pleasure, sense of achievement, because that gives me the right kind of energy, the motivational energy, the enjoyment energy. That's what we're looking for. And I think that there's a lot in Agile, the things that we do, that pushes us much more towards the right-hand side. I'm also very interested from a neuroscience perspective in the School of Positive Psychology, which shows us that when we are feeling good, it's interesting that we can take in more information. Therefore, we're more likely to have insights and make connections and have new ideas, which also feeds our positivity. So for all these reasons, I want to keep putting my stakeholders, those that I'm trying to involve in my projects, programs, and initiatives, over into the right-hand side. Are we happy with that? Does that make sense? See what we're trying to do. So let's have a look at how some of the Agile things can help us do that. That's effectively what we're looking at. Now, I've put up a really simple Agile plan. I'm sure you can do it in any which way you want. Iterative. I could have used scaled Agile framework and looked at increments. I don't care what the language is. Chunks, really. Tranches, stages, phases, whatever. With an outcome at the end of each of them. That's the thing that we're going for. So there are things in here that absolutely will hit home for the brain. One of the things is that we are giving people a short amount of time to get things done. What does that do for the brain? Well, actually, that reduces processing power, because what my brain is constantly trying to do is look ahead all the time. Our brains are pattern recognition machines. They're trying to look for a pattern. They're trying to predict all of the time. Always looking ahead. So the further out you ask me to look, the more of a neural load, if you like, the harder my brain has to work. And if you think about the fact that the brain is about 3% of our body weight, depending on how much you ate over Christmas, but about 20% of your oxygen usage. And the brain is in a privileged position when it comes to oxygen. It's one of the organs that gets it first. So when we are pushing our brain to think more, that's where we get tired. Yeah? So even though you're concentrating on this call, that this is all new to you. You don't know what I'm about to say. You don't know where it's going. So your brain's having to think a lot and trying to cast ahead. I wonder where she'll go. Will she finish on time? Can I put things in the chat? All of that is what your brain's trying to cope with. Keep it for 1 hour, that's okay. But if I'm asking you to concentrate on, these are all the things we're doing for the next 5 years, your poor brain is really going to struggle. So the first thing to think about is this thing called the neural load. To give you an example of how the brain works, I know, for example, that when I leave my office here this evening, I'm going to walk just a few steps across to the door. And the way the door works is I'll pull it to the left and I will step out and I'll turn back and I'll close the door. My brain, when I turn to finish this webinar, will already have calculated all of those steps and thought all about those things. Now, I did this a little while ago where I went to the door and it was locked. Don't ask me how that happened, but anyway, it was locked. And my brain, I could feel, it was like a visceral response. I could feel the prickling down the back of my neck. Oh my God, what do I do now? There's nobody else here. How am I going to get out of this? Because the pattern that my brain was expecting was not there. So we need to think about the fact that our brains are always looking for a pattern. Give them a short amount of time. Don't ask them to think too far ahead, and you'll get some real benefits in terms of reducing the energy required. Does that make a little bit of sense? Thumbs up if I'm talking sense. If I'm not, let me know. Because I think how the brain operates in this way, bearing in mind as well when it comes to planning, that as far as the brain is concerned, time is an artificial construct. The brain gets dark and light, day and night. But we as human beings were the ones that came up with this whole thing about days of the week, months, minutes, hours. All the brain knows is that immediate is something it needs to deal with, and let's cast ahead a little bit for some patterns. So again, we have something in, as far as the brain's concerned, called delay discounting. The further out you ask me to imagine something's happening, the harder I find that, because it lacks impact, it lacks a sense of urgency, it lacks that immediacy that connects me to, oh, got to do something. So if I want to talk to you about your summer holiday, or I want to talk to you about what you're doing this time next year, what are you doing for Christmas? Your brain's going, it's fried. I don't know. I don't know. I don't care, because it's so far away. It doesn't matter. Let's talk about what I'm doing the next few weeks. So again, think about the pensions industry, think about the funeral industry. These are both places that really suffer from this idea of delay discounting, because what has to happen is you have to try to imagine the future in the present. There was an advertising campaign a while ago where an older woman rang the doorbell and gave a bunch of flowers to a younger woman and said, thank you. She was thanking her younger self for having saved into a pension. And then you had all the adverts showing how this older woman was having a most marvellous retirement. That's the kind of advertising you have to do if you want people to imagine far out in terms of what you're asking them to do, because it doesn't feel real. That's where sprints work so well, because we can imagine what I'm doing this week and next week. That's about fine. Further out than that, and I've got excuses. I've got, oh, it doesn't feel that real. How many of you during December, but I can't be the only one who's paying the price now, because I did this, even though I know delay discounting. But in December, I said things like, oh, well, I'll put that into January, because January before Christmas felt like a mythical month that would never really arrive. And therefore, I parked about 13 weeks worth of work into January, because it was so far away, it didn't matter, because there was this big thing called Christmas right in my head. And that's all I could think about. So that's where delay discounting comes into it. So the idea that we work in short bursts, whether or not that's sprints or whether or not we do several sprints, maybe we do 8 to 12 weeks of an iteration or an increment where we're actually delivering something quite significant. But anything longer than 3 to 4 months, often, because if you think about the calendars we all work to, there are ceremonies within 3 to 4 months all the time. So in the Western calendar, we've just had Christmas, we're coming up to Easter, and then we'll have a summer break, and then after the summer, we're coming up to Christmas. There are always ceremonies. You can have a look at any calendar where there are religious festivals that we sort of leap from one to the other, that they are times where we spend time with our families, when we do celebrations. So they mean something, and we hook ourselves around it. Schools, anyone who's got kids in school knows the term times, the holiday times. That's the sort of thing that we're thinking about. The other thing that our planning can do is give us frequent achievements. Going back to the brain chemistry, every time I achieve, I get that little dopamine hit. It doesn't need to be a great, huge achievement. I was looking at a game of solitaire on my phone the other night. I've loaded it on. It's one where you get fishes in an aquarium for every game you win or something. The reason I downloaded it is I wanted to have a look at the gamification experience. And even though it's a silly little game, as I play the game, I get frequent achievements. I get given coins. If I played a couple of games, I get an extra fish. I get a bonus where I get some kind of plant for my aquarium. It's all, and every time, even though it's a stupid game, I know what's happening in my brain. my brain gets excited and it gets a sense of pleasure and happiness, because every time I win something, I go, it's that dopamine hit. So we need to think about in our plan, how are we creating those opportunities? I'll talk more about celebrations in a while, because they are incredibly important for the brain. They give fuel for us to be resilient and be motivated. Celebrations are vital. We'll have a look at that in a while. The other thing that we're doing with a more iterative planning approach is we reduce that information overload. So I said the further out you go, the more you've got to cast forward potential scenarios, what could happen, because of that pattern sort of recognition. We're trying to create the pattern. So if you are keeping me focused for the next 2 weeks, I'm not having to keep in my head all the possible scenarios for like the next 6 months. So we can reduce that information overload, and because we've got a short time frame, we've got that sense of certainty. Yeah, that feels quite certain. I know what's coming up. Yes, okay, that's good. Yeah, so it feels more definite, more guaranteed. Whereas when we don't think that something's definite or guaranteed, when we think there's a sense of uncertainty, our brain immediately goes into running scenarios. Our brains are brilliant at contingency planning, you know, coming up with options all the time. It takes processing power. It makes us more tired, less energy, less resilience. The other thing I have got here is that if you've got a small amount of time and you can be more definite, more descriptive about what you should end up with at the end of 2 weeks, then we're going to do something really important for the brain. Our brains have a very negative impact if the reality doesn't meet our expectations. And we experience this as an emotion like disappointment. But actually, as far as our brain's concerned, it creates an anxiety and a stress there. It makes us more negative. You know, I didn't get what I was expecting. And so the further out you go, the more chance there is of having that mismatch, because the further out you go, the less specific things are, the less immediate, less clear they feel. There's greater uncertainty. There is greater opportunity for me to imagine scenarios that you never intended. But you don't know that, because my brain's ticking ahead, thinking of all the things that might happen. And when they don't happen, I'm the one that really sort of sinks to the bottom. I'm the one that's struggling with that. So that's something we need to think about with our planning. There are so many benefits of this iterative planning approach. It's really exciting. The last one here, I'm no artist, but I can, on a flip chart, when I'm in a board meeting, when I'm doing it online, I can create some kind of visual like this. Visualization is really important for the brain because it uses less energy. The least energy is smell, but I'm not sure, apart from lighting a candle in a board meeting, how much I can help with that. But certainly showing people a picture cuts the processing. The hardest thing you're doing right now is listening to me. That is the highest processing power of all. So if you think about the 5 senses, smell is the lowest, then there's sight. Yeah. And then I think it's taste, then touch, then it's hearing. So thinking about how you can draw pictures. This is an immediate picture. So hopefully you're as in love with agile sort of planning and visual planning as I am. But I will say, I'm caveating it. There are a couple of things that, from the brain perspective, too much of the almost running on one thing after another, one iteration, one sprint after the next sprint after the next sprint. The thing that we fail to do, therefore, is we don't build in enough time for celebrating, and we don't build in enough time for mind wandering and creating ideas. So that's something we need to think about. So one of the things that I've learned from a neuroscience perspective is, I'll call it a retrospective, but I know what I'm doing neuroscientifically. First of all, those spaces are for celebrating. Now, celebrating doesn't need to be big official celebrations. It can be in the brain. It can be reflecting over the fact that, oh, I got that finished today, and oh, that customer responded a lot better to that than I thought. You know, it's that, oh, something good happened. And as soon as you do that, the dopamine hit is huge. The endorphins, the positive chemicals, the pleasure chemicals get switched on. And that reduces any anxiety that I've got. Having studied this for so long, I spend a lot of time mentally making sure I'm working 14 hours a day at the moment because I've got a big customer launch coming up. And I'm getting up virtually in the middle of the night to get to work, and I'm not finishing till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And so knowing that my stress, if I'm not careful, my stress keeps building up and up and up. And I care because that makes me less creative. It makes me more defensive. It makes me quicker to anger. None of the good stuff. So halfway through my day today, I stepped back and thought, well, we've got that finished, and that went very well. And that was a good meeting. I had a few little celebrations, did a little bit of a dance, because that physicality really hit home in the brain. So I'm no dancer, but I was doing a little dance because, just by that little celebration, yes. And I also did something physical. I made myself a special coffee to celebrate as well, because again, I was allowing time for celebration, even though it's in the middle of a very busy day, because the time spent is when my brain is spending time going, okay, we're turning on the taps. The good stuff is coming. And I want to enjoy that good stuff. So don't rush celebrations. And when it comes to, the alpha waves in the brain is when we're doing some maybe often a repetitive physical task, but we've got time. Have you noticed you're more creative? You have more ideas when you're doing something you're not concentrating on. And that's why sometimes going for a walk, sometimes it happens in the shower, maybe at the gym. I go to my yoga and Pilates classes, and I sort of think, well, I can charge this as a business expense, because actually, while I'm at yoga, I will have a creative idea. Because towards the end of the class, an hour and a quarter later, I've had a chance to let my mind wander. Our challenge, I think, is to make sure that we are building in those opportunities for people to do that, to encourage that. So thinking about how we can get people working so that they can just have time to decompress and let their minds wander, I think is really important. Again, still making sense? Thumbs up if I am, because I can see you on camera. Yeah. Helping. Yeah. All these are great reasons, really great reasons why Agile is so powerful. And as you can tell, I'm kind of in love with what we do. Prioritization. Whichever mechanism you want for prioritization, there's some good stuff for the brain coming out of this. Yeah. Well, we've already talked, I think, about certainty, but let's have a look at a new chemical now. We were looking at dopamine for achievement. Let's have a look at oxytocin. How I feel right now. When Nabil gave his introduction, and he acknowledged the fact that me and him and his brother and a few others were all a part of setting up Agnostic Agile, he reminded me that I was part of that group. I've moved on since then. I've got lots of other things on the go, but I was part of that. And what he triggered was that lovely feel-good chemical, the bonding, trusting chemical of I'm amongst friends, I'm amongst my own tribe, the oxytocin chemical, which really makes us feel very good. So whenever, you feel like we're all in this together, common goals, common objectives, other things that we have in common, and if we're all working to the same priority and we're all using the same criteria to prioritize our work, then that really helps us feel like, yeah, I'm part of the crowd, we're all working together. So certainly there's a common goal, common objectives. The other thing that prioritization does is it's about having a quality conversation. It gets rid of misunderstandings. I can be much clearer about what needs to happen and when it needs to happen and why. Why do I have to do this piece of work before I do this piece of work? Prioritization gives us all the rationale for that. And therefore, there is a much greater clarity of communication. You will tell me what I need to do and why, and I will more likely understand you rather than misunderstand you and go off at a tangent. That greater clarity reduces processing power needed by the brain. So it takes less energy. Using shorter sentences, using pictures, all of these things help with those quality conversations. So prioritization, I think, is a big part of that. Something else, these words come from the Pepe model of neuroscience, by the way, which is a really useful approach to how we apply neuroscience. So if you're thinking, what's that phrase, create anticipation and promote hunting? I'm going to explain it to you, but it comes from that model. The anticipation piece is that I absolutely get energy from being excited about the challenge in front of me, because I'm working towards something, as long as we remember to celebrate it when I have achieved something, so I get the most positive chemicals. But I'm out there hunting for the solutions, and I'm hunting for the right answers, and I'm hunting to get the work done. That creates that anticipation and promote hunting. It's actually quite exciting. I feel challenged, I feel stretched. And so actually there's some, for each of those stretches, I've got some pleasure chemicals, I've got some endorphins, I'm enjoying that. As long as the stretch isn't too far, if it's impossible, then actually that just puts me back into stress and anxiety. But the prioritization, I think, clarifies what it is I'm trying to do. There's a real boost of sort of dopamine, releases the energy, motivates me to want to achieve this thing. Yeah. Prioritization tells me that it's a valuable piece of work. So again, I'm feeling motivated because I'm going, oh, what I'm doing is important. So again, the dopamine is going to, for each achievement, is going to be higher, because I'm thinking this is important stuff, this is valuable stuff. I'm just going to have a quick look. Anything in the chat there that I should be aware of? Anything that you want to call out? If you do, just let me know, Nabil. But otherwise, I think I'm making sense.
Yeah, some great comments, but no particular questions as yet.
Great, okay. So you can see the joke here. When it comes to neuroscience, if I'm just going to go back through the slides for a moment so I can just, we're part of the way through and I just want to reconfirm some of the key things, is that what I am focusing on here is on the right-hand side. I am looking through my Agile techniques, a lot through Agile planning and through prioritization, to maximize certainty, to maximize commonality amongst the team, to maximize the focus. You don't have to cast too far forward. But all of those things give energy, motivation through dopamine. Endorphins is all about the pleasure and minimizing the pain. And the oxytocin as well, feeling part of the group, the bonding. And this is where, as you can see here, I have got creativity, I've got resilience. So that's what I'm looking for. So I'll get into, feeling I'm really enjoying what we're doing, and I'll do more of it, and I can do more of it. Next one, I've just put up a team charter or a team canvas, whatever you want to think about. Again, this will come back to creates common goals, objectives. I feel a part of a group. And that is a visceral feeling. You can't help your brain triggering really positive chemicals when that happens. As soon as you build connections between people, as soon as you build similarities between people. So whenever you're bringing people together, one of my favorite little games, simple technique, but it's putting people into pairs and basically challenging them each. I had 10 people today and I put them into 5 pairs and I basically said, right, you've got 3 minutes. See how many things you have in common. Could be what you studied at university, what pets you've got, what your hobbies are, whatever. But you give them that bit of gamification in there. So also this idea of you're anticipating who's going to get the highest, which is, again, a bit more of a positive chemical. But by doing that and then them sharing some of the things they have in common, the pair themselves will feel very bonded. But also sharing the results around the other pairs makes them realize, oh, I've got things in common with those as well. So it builds up that overarching feeling that actually we've got quite a lot in common. And that also leads on to, whenever I'm building a team, positive social interactions. Those moments and crafting those moments where people have a chance to talk to each other, so chatting however informal that is, the chatting we did at the beginning of this call, it's all incredibly important for making us feel good. That chatting that we did at the beginning of the call, saying hello to each other, opened the possibility for learning, because it reduced your anxiety and stress, it increased your pleasure, it increased your creativity, it increased the amount of information you could take on board. So feeling part of a group, feeling we have things in common, social chatter, social engagement, all a part of actually boosting those positive chemicals that we have. And that also goes to something around informality. The reason informal meetings and social gatherings is so important is that the brain gets very stressed by status. Even if you're at the top of the tree, the brain still gets stressed by status, because what the brain is doing is, and we are quite, we are social creatures, but we are quite tribal. So the brain automatically can't help itself. It tries to sort of position us. You know, where am I in relation to these other people? Do I know more? Am I more experienced? You know, or have I got a more senior job title? We're constantly looking for where we are. So the more you can remove any aspects of status and just get people chatting informally about things, you know, so conversations about pets and sports and hobbies, really helpful, because it gets away from any kind of hierarchical, how many qualifications have you got, how long have you worked here, what kind of projects have you worked on, kind of stuff, because that creates an anxiety and pushes you more towards the threat response. The informality of people being able to chat to each other and just, you know, just enjoy each other's company for what it is, that's the important thing that you're looking for. So when you're building teams, thinking about how are we bringing that in, so that hierarchy, and I don't just mean hierarchy in terms of job titles, I mean hierarchy, people can position themselves against the types of project, how complex they've worked on things, the types of systems they've worked on, the years of experience they've got. So the more you can draw people away from that kind of positioning, the better. So that's the team building bit.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
Right, this stuff's music to my ears, really. And what I'm curious about is, how do we introduce this stuff into a conversation? Because, like, I do a lot of agile coaching, and I'm forever fixing the dogma of Scrum Masters or Flow Masters or whatever they like to call themselves. And you know, they spend so much time preaching the mechanics of Scrum or Agile or whatever it might be. And generally, the problem doesn't lie with that. It actually lies with these psychological, neurological things of why team dynamics don't work. And I think it'd be really interesting to kind of work on this is, how do you introduce this conversation? Because you can solve a huge amount of team problems that are outside of methodologies and frameworks that actually make Agile really happen. You know, we talk about saying and doing and being Agile. This makes you be Agile and do Agile. That makes sense?
I think absolutely. And I think I can only tell you about my journey, which is that, first of all, I think that my experience has been, we've all got brains, and actually people are genuinely quite passionate about hearing about how they work. And whenever I've gone into this, the brain chemical stuff, I've kept it really, really simple. And I would always keep it really, really simple. But people are fascinated by that, and they get the general gist that some things will stimulate one chemical in the brain and some things will stimulate something else. So I think the fact that we all have brains, people really do enjoy this stuff. However, I would caveat it with my own journey has been getting some kind of qualification and studying more. I read a lot on neuroscience anyway, but I have studied various courses. I'm now the chief examiner of the new Neuroscience for Change course, which has been, I think, really helpful for the people that have been taking it to feel like I've got something with the word neuroscience in it. So if anybody challenges me when I talk about these things, I can feel there's a credibility and a confidence behind that. I've also turned an awful lot of this into practical techniques in the Agile Change Coach course, but it's all based on neuroscience and positive psychology. But my own experience has been that you can't just do, I think you do have to get something behind you, because I think that, you know, so that you can point to that and go, well, you need a wider reading around the subject. There's a lot of dryness around neuroscience, and the reason that I, along with another neuroscientist, commissioned the Neuroscience for Change course. I was the chair of the Change Management Institute for 6 years. I'm the founder of the Change Capability Community. I wanted us in Change and in Agile to have something that explained what we do and how we do it, that got some kind of recognition. So that's been my journey. And I think so there has to be a little bit of credibility behind it. But you're absolutely right. Everybody has a brain. Everybody loves this stuff. And I think you can get some really good conversations going. But if you've studied a bit, then you've got a bit more of the source material behind it, which I think helps you come up with your own examples. In fact, most of what happens on the Agile Change Coach course and on the Neuroscience for Change course is people having moments of discovery about how they will put it across to people. So that's been my journey. There's a question there from Zach. Do you want to ask your question, and then I'll finish off with some of the other bits that I want to say.
Yeah, so it was coming in on that. There's a technique where you can measure the climate of each team. You're an ECVAL's climate model. And that allows the team to then come back and make suggestions on how they can change their climate.
Yeah.
Brings them in. My story is that I had a brain injury 8 years ago through meningitis. And coming back up through that, the stuff that I read that was really good was Bessel van der Kolk, Norman Doidge, The Body Keeps the Score. Those books are really easy to get into. And if you've got the time and patience, you can go for Stephen Porges with the polyvagal system, which Deb Dana does. Which makes
I think Basil's book is a good starter, though. I think Basil's book is a good, is definitely a good starter. Yeah, I think that's really good contribution. Thank you very much, Zach. I had a similar.
If you start with art, and then bring it back into the business context of Agile, it makes things a lot easier because you expand out into that area where you get the dopamine hits, and then bring it back into business.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's really interesting to hear your story, because I had a similar thing. When I was 13, my mum had a massive stroke, and I was able to look back at how some of the things that I did, because I was her primary carer, and how I got some of the things that I did. And I can now see it through the lens of neuroscience, go, oh, that's why that worked. Like when I was teaching her to brush her hair again, things like that. It was just fascinating. We might have had some similar experiences there. That was the team one. The next one I want to talk about, psychological safety. We've probably all done this to death, but I think that there's something here around what's happening in terms of the brain when we're looking at this, is we can create with psychological safety a culture of bravery and risk-taking. And I put something practical up here around a boundary of authority for team or individual decisions. Because if you want people to take a risk, again, the brain is always calculating forward, remember, thinking what the next steps are. And what holds us back is that feeling of, oh God, if I speak up, if I share my idea, maybe they'll close me down, maybe they'll laugh at me, So whenever you want people to be braver, to take more risks, one of the things you have to do is very clearly set a boundary of, well, you can take decisions within this boundary. Don't go past it, otherwise it becomes more of an issue. Okay. And that also stimulates that ability. You're giving them a freedom pass almost within that boundary to challenge the status quo. And there are a number of things that come up here in terms of the brain. When I ask a question, I feel more of a sense of involvement in the subject. So there's a sense of achievement that I asked a question, so I get a dopamine hit. When I feel able to share my idea by challenging the status quo, again, I feel that dopamine hit. But the other thing that happens is that when the brain articulates something, your own thoughts, then the brain takes greater ownership of those thoughts almost. It kind of embeds them. So if you want people to sort of take an idea and really have ownership of it, the thing you want to do is stimulate discussion, because every time they share remarks about it, they are basically taking on more and more ownership for that piece of work, because they've had a thought, they've articulated a thought, the thought's got embedded again. Does that make a little bit of sense? Yeah, that kind of involvement. I'm conscious of the time, so George, I'll come to you at the end if I may, and pick up on that next question, because I'm conscious I won't get through it otherwise. The other thing is that what we want to do in terms of that psychological safety is we want to promote the idea of curiosity. I've done an awful lot of work in terms of how do you create an environment for curiosity, and there's some really practical things we can do to get people more into a questioning mode. Feeling safe to question is actually things like, here's a whole load of open questions. Every time you come up against something, make sure you ask these questions. Don't just go straight to your assumptions. And that ties back to the other piece that we said earlier on. And in fact, I'll go back to it so that I've got that in front of you, which is that here we talked about, we want to reduce any mismatch between expectation and reality. Being curious, challenging the status quo, asking questions, all of that creates greater clarification. It creates, therefore, greater certainty. It therefore reduces that mismatch between expectation and reality. And it's that mismatch that causes some very negative emotions, very negative feelings. So that's something that we need to be aware of. So the more we can have that safe space, it isn't just the touchy-feely, oh, it's nice to be psychologically safe. We're actually, as far as the brain's concerned, what we are doing is reducing mismatch, because people can speak up, they can ask questions, and in reducing mismatch, we reduce that anxiety, that stress. There can be a real hit, you know, when that mismatch is there. Well, I thought that was going to happen, and it hasn't. We know that we feel disappointment, anger, irritation, annoyance. We know when something hasn't gone exactly as we expected, that that's what's going to happen to us. So anything we can do to allow people to ask questions, get involved, and promote that kind of, let's ask some questions, let's be curious, really important. There is some brain training you can do for curiosity, which is about shifting people from taking things at face value. So if you want some coaching tips, it's things like getting people to Google something about, if they hear something, or they've read something in the paper and then they're not sure of something, that they Google it, they ask a question. I do this all the time. It drives my husband insane. But if I'm reading something and I don't know what they're talking about, I will follow up the link, or I'll Google a question and, oh, that's what that means. But it's because I'm trying to maintain that culture always of curiosity and a reminder, I don't know all the answers. So let me go and find some. All of that really positive brain chemicals. Okay. Last but not least, and so important for the brain, is around celebration, right? Celebration is, we need to think about what to celebrate, when, how frequently, types of celebration. One of the things that's come up numerous times when I've been dealing with this is making sure that we don't create toxic positivity, because people feel that they can only speak up to celebrate. They are only allowed to say positive things within the team. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about enabling people to have a reflection that's been completed. It's now off my to-do list. That was responded to really well. The customer is very happy with that. That's a solution I didn't think we had. That's quite insightful. That's new and different. Really getting the team to think about and anticipate. There's something here around when you talk about potential things you might celebrate. It's almost like the inverse of the, you know, we do the pre-mortem where we think about all the things that might go wrong. So we look ahead. You know, I think from a brain perspective, that's really dumb. Let's turn it on its head and let's look at all the things that might go right and what we would classify as a celebratory event, because then you're anticipating really good stuff. before it's even happened. You are increasing your dopamine, you're increasing the endorphins, which makes you more creative and makes you more insightful, which increases the chances that you'll actually do the right thing and be able to celebrate it. So there's something there around pre-mortems are starting to freak me out. And actually what I want to do, if I'm going to do it's not a pre-mortem, I don't know what the word is yet, but it's looking for the good stuff. That's what I want us to do. Okay. Creating that culture of positivity. Absolutely. It is, you can't get away from the fact that positivity does certain things about our processing power. It increases the amount of information that we can cope with. Positivity increases our resilience. There is a big link here between our ability to keep going and how positive we feel about something. And that isn't a surprise when you think about it. When something annoys you, when something irritates you, when you've totally had enough about something, you don't like something, you are much more likely to give up. You are much more likely to find a distraction activity. Because when you're really enjoying something, when you're feeling the benefits of something, you're more likely to keep going. So it's that culture of positivity. And by training the brain to look for possible good things before they've even happened, again, you are more likely to find those things. You think about it, I'll say to you, oh, I haven't seen many red cars on the road recently. The next time you're out, I'm afraid all you're going to see is red cars. It's that kind of thing. You're setting an intention in the brain. So we need to think about how we can do that for celebrations. And then the last thing is, of course, celebrations makes us feel valued, feel respected. So it takes away all the negatives of that status and feeling unsure and uncertain about where I fit into the world and am I good enough? And actually it gives me all the positive chemicals that you could possibly want. And as I said, I think just to bear in mind, this is only, I think this is the start. In 50 minutes or so, I can give you a taster. But I hope that you can see that the enthusiasm I've got for it absolutely is matched by when you start using this in practice, you start talking about these stories. I see that Vina's on the call. I don't know if she's still on the call, but you came on the Neuroscience for Change course recently. I noticed you had a lot of insights. Do you want to say anything, Vina, about, was it a good experience? Did you learn stuff? She's still there.
I am, yes, hello. Yeah, we were just having a chat actually whilst you were having your Windows update, Melanie. And I was saying my biggest takeaway was that I kind of learned and picked up bits of neuroscience theory beforehand, but for me it was all about the practical application of it. And just being able to have that real kind of, like you were saying earlier, that sort of evidence base behind me to say, actually, this is why this technique works. And it, just gives you that extra layer of credibility, I think, particularly when you're working with senior leaders and you're potentially having to sort of persuade them that actually, we might need to stop and celebrate or, do a team bonding event and they're just wanting to get to, the end goal. Actually, it just gives you some real great techniques to be able to sort of, enhance and strengthen the experience for people going through sometimes quite traumatic change. So, yeah, really, I love the practicality of it and sharing it with the group was brilliant.
I think there's something there, something I really pick up on for senior leaders, team leaders, whatever, that sometimes trying to get somewhere in the fastest possible time, when you skip things like the opportunity for mind wandering, curiosity, celebrations, actually has a very detrimental effect on the overall longer term productivity of the team. Because one of the things that we look at in these courses is around what's called peaks and valleys. You can't keep going. You can't keep going. What the brain wants is fluctuations. The brain loves it loves to sort of be under a bit of pressure and to have an achievement, but then we need a bit of a break. The break doesn't have to be long, but there has to be something where there is in micro breaks. It might only be a few nanoseconds, but it's a take the foot off the gas before you start going up again. Yeah. Again, I mean, I could talk like this for hours because there are so many applications of just basically a little bit of knowledge around neuroscience, which is useful. I'll turn to George, and then there's maybe some other questions. We'll see if John's going to get his steps in. How many have you done so far on this talk? Yeah, getting up the 10,000.
Oh, I'm already past that. Yeah.
Oh, you're very good. You're very good. I've got a St. Bernard that I've got to go and walk. So I'll get my steps in the hard way. George, did you want to say something? You had your hand up. I think you're on mute, George. still on mute, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Okay, Nabil, any follow-up, anything you would like to say as we come to the end of the day?
There was a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Or who was it from? John Kern? You actually posted a question in the chat.
Oh yeah, while he's walking, I'm pretty impressed by that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if around the psychological safety slide is when I posted a question about adding a little more around the body is really good at sensing safety more than just, sort of like the psychological. What do you thought about thinking more of the embodied felt sense and the sense of safety that we know in the pit of our stomach, so to speak, expanding that from just psychological.
Yeah, I mean, there is something you can do for that is you can get people talking about when they took risks and how it panned out far better than they'd hoped. So that they relive an experience where actually I was fearful for my psychological safety. I thought my boss was going to yell at me. This bad thing was going to happen. And actually, by talking through the fact it went better than I thought, you get two benefits neuroscientifically. You start to create that feeling that more, it's almost a physical thing of, oh, I'm in a safe space. But also by when you get people talking through, I took a risk and it actually panned out really well, you get the opposite of the mismatch problem. When we have a mismatch where it's gone far better than we'd hoped, something good happened that we didn't expect, actually we get sort of like, I think it's more than double the positive chemicals than we would on the negative side. So it's an incredibly powerful thing. When something unexpectedly good happens, wow, that's amazing. So you get two hits actually for one thing there. So that's definitely worth doing. The more you can get people to articulate something where they took a risk, they felt unsafe, but it turned out to be safe, is very, very important. I think George is off mute now. So go on then, George.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. So I was just going on the psychological safety idea. So there's a couple of things, I guess. Like you talked about talking about things in the third person. I think that's really important, like talking about the problem rather than blaming.
Yes. But I will caveat that. Be very careful, because otherwise you're getting into that negativity. You can talk about the problem as long as it has the happy ending. You've got to make sure it's partnered with some positivity. Or if you want to talk about a problem that you haven't got a happy ending for, you do it in such a way that it is very much a creative space where people can add in their suggestions. So that person, there's oxytocin there because I feel supported because you're helping me solve my problem. You're on my side and you're sharing your creativity. So that would be a way to
looking for a solution was the context I was thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I think that would work.
Yeah.
And then there was one other question. Do you think De Bono's techniques work well with this stuff? Like he sort of has quite a few that he developed in his life. Yeah, for example, the 6 hats. Like you get people thinking all in the same direction without judging people, and then you switch to another direction, and then you kind of the whole brainstorming idea. I think that's really smart.
Absolutely, because people will feel a sense of bonding and feel a sense of, again, it comes back to common goal. If you are going to do that, you have to set up the intention. What is the outcome? What are we trying to get to at the end? So everybody has that common goal that they're trying to get to, but certainly that collaboration. So collaboration and teamwork, whenever you're getting people to collaborate, you get the benefits of the oxytocin. Thank you very much for that. Nabil, I get that we are finishing now.
Yeah, I know your husband has dinner ready 1 minute ago, so I don't want to deprive you from dinner for too much longer. I just want to thank you. That was so inspiring, and I learned a lot personally. I can tell from the incredibly long chat and the questions we had that the audience found it really inspiring as well. So I'm going to end as usual with my awkward virtual round of applause. Thank you so much, Melanie.
Yay! Yeah. Thank you very much. Lovely.
It was a lot better when you were here in person in 2020, the last time you spoke for us, but yeah.
Yeah, but then we had COVID. I don't know. I was the last
like a week later.
COVID.
It was not the best timing or good timing, depending on your perspective. So Melanie, thank you so much. Audience, thank you for joining in. I hope you enjoyed it. The recording will be on the event page in a couple of days, so you can look out for it again if you want to relook at it.
That's brilliant. Take care, guys. Thank you very much. Have a very good evening. Nabil, I'll send you the slides. If you want to put them out, I'll
That would be
PDF them
awesome,
overnight and
yes.
get them to you. Okay.
Well,
See you. Take
Bon
care, guys.
appétit.
Bye.